Good evening. My name is John Jenkins, and this is Old School Point of View. Time will always bring change. My grandfather, who lived with us growing up, was born in 1881, and he lived in 1974 and died at the age of 93. And I've often wondered about his life. Being born in 1881, he was 16 years after the Civil War ended. That's just mind-blowing. He lived in a time when horse and buggy was still the primary mode of personal transportation. He saw the first airplane invented. He lived past the turn of the century and watched the automobile come into production. He lived through the Great Depression, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and most of the Vietnam War. So he lived a very full life, and it amazes me that he went from riding on a horse to seeing man walk on the moon during his lifetime span. All the changes that time brought, he witnessed and experienced in his life. Me personally, I was born in 1957. That was 3 years after the One Nation Under God was added to our Pledge of Allegiance, and 2 years after In God We Trust was passed by Congress to be put on our paper money. I lived through Kennedy. I lived through other presidents. I lived through all the way up to the turn of the century as we watched our economy and our nation and our society and our culture change. And here it is, 2026, and I'm 68 years old. And I remember things now are not anything like they were when I was a kid. Things are so different. When I was a kid, it was rich people that had air conditioning in their car. We always had what we called 440 air conditioning. That was 4 windows down and 40 mile an hour. But been so many changes in my lifetime. The people today, just like I couldn't imagine my grandpa's early life, people today can't imagine my early life because of being my age. I've seen so many things change. My point in sharing that is change is not restricted to just our social lives or our private sector lives. Change is also affects the church, the Christian, and it affects Christianity as we know it. When I was a kid, and I went to church as a kid, things were much different than they are now. And when you went to church as a kid, there was no special place for you to go outside of the sanctuary. We sat in the sanctuary. Then as a young adult, I remember the churches I attended, we always opened up with what we called an altar prayer. It wasn't that everybody gave in requests and then nobody did anything about them. We had requests, and then everybody was invited to the altar to pray. And that's how you opened a service. And it didn't matter if you prayed 2 minutes or 10 minutes. That was going to be a part of the service regardless. I remember that preachers didn't preach by a clock. They didn't worry about whether they were going to keep people too long. They preached what they felt God had given them, and then they moved on accordingly. But things have changed. I look at the church today, and most of the kids and young people we see in church today, they can't relate at all to the things that I've experienced as a Christian. They can't remember a church that didn't have internet, that didn't have Wi-Fi. When I went to church as a kid, I wasn't worried about technology. I was worried about would the windows open if they didn't have air conditioning. But today we have, and please don't take this as a negative criticism. It's not what it's intended to be. It's an observance. Just like I could not relate to what it meant to ride a horse as primary transportation, and just like other people could not relate to how my life was 68 years ago, other young people born in the 90s and the 2000s, today in the church, they also can't relate, the young people cannot relate to how difficult it was to establish a church and keep a church, and what it meant to pray, what it meant to testify. And really, if we're honest, maybe not in every church, but most churches, you don't hear testimonies anymore. I remember when I was a young person, everybody was welcome to testify every service. Nobody had a clock on you. We don't pray like we used to. So the result of it, what I'm getting at, is that we have a group of young people today that can't relate to the sacrifice it takes to truly advance the gospel, to the energy it takes, to the focus that's required, and the willingness to give up self and go all in for Jesus. The comprehension of what Jesus really did for them and who they are without Christ. We have a generation of people who don't know that. Their gospel has been smoke and mirrors and flashing lights and big events and auditoriums and loud music and music that strikes their emotions more than it brings them before the throne of God. And they can't relate to, I guess, what we could call hard church work, because it takes church work to make a church work. And so I have no blame, no criticism at all of young adults and teenagers and even on down, because it's not their fault. Sadly, the generation even before them, their parents and sometimes their grandparents, were brought up in the same era. And I'm going to say something very boldly. A lot of them don't really have anything themselves to teach their children or their grandchildren, because they was raised up out of the sanctuary. They were now, I know many children's programs are excellent, and I've experienced some excellent ones, and I've observed some excellent ones. But throughout my life, I've also observed those who did nothing to teach children even about the fundamentals of salvation. Now, believe it or not, we are born without Christ. We are born lost. We are born with a sin curse, and we need a Savior. And that Savior is Jesus Christ. And without Him, we will not make it. It's that simple, because we have a sin problem. But sin is mostly not preached at church today because it will offend people. And people will leave. And so therefore, things go on in the lives of people that they need to know is not biblically sound, but they never hear that, or very rarely hear that. So how much more our young people don't have the understanding they need today of what Christianity is, because they can't relate to that time that we really took our church seriously. Some of you will remember we went 3 times a week. When we raised our children, my wife and I, if there was a revival, we went every night. We was there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And I'm not saying church is the cure-all. That's not really what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that presentation of who Jesus is important every day. And there's no substitute for Him. And He is not revealed through smoke and mirrors. He's not revealed through loud head-banging music. He's not revealed in those things. He is revealed through that still small voice of conviction that we experience when we are taught or we are preached to that we need to make changes in our life according to the plan of God to know Jesus Christ. Well, I'm not going to take any more time on that. I hope you've got what I say. I love our young people today. I just want them to know Jesus down deep in their hearts and not just with their minds and with their lips. So that's how it looks from an old school point of view. God bless you all and have a great evening.